my dearest forbidden memory. They tell me to write this down, to spill the ink and purge the ghost of you from my veins. They call it a confession. I call it a love letter to a scar. For in the frozen heart of Dragon's Reach, where the wind sings a dirge through the mountain passes and the very stone weeps frost, I learned that fire is not born of sun, but of shadow. And the most dangerous flame is the one you kindle with your own hands, believing you can control the inferno. This is not a story of heroes. It is a story of a knife, and the hand that held it, and the heart it was meant to pierce. Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. Part 1. The Ember in the Snow. The summons came not with a shout, but with the whisper of silk. I was in the solar of my family's manor, Vane Hold, a place perpetually chilled despite the roaring hearths. The scent of pine sap and cold iron was the only perfume I had ever known. My father, Lord Vane, stood with his back to me, a silhouette against the leaded glass window, the perpetual twilight of the north casting him in shades of gray. "The circle has spoken," he said, his voice like grinding stones. No greeting, no fatherly affection. We were pieces on a board, and he had just been instructed to sacrifice his queen. The circle of flames, a name spoken only in the most secure, shadow-draped corners of the kingdom. A network of nobles, mages, and discontents who saw the rot festering at the core of Dragon's Reach and sought to burn it out. The royal advisor, Kael Morn, was that rot. He was the true power behind a weak king, a man whose cruelty was as legendary as his intellect. He had extinguished ancient bloodlines, taxed the people into starvation, and wielded a strange, cold magic that was said to still the very hearts of his enemies. He was the reason our halls felt so cold, the reason my mother's portrait seemed to weep from the wall. "You are to go to the capital," my father continued, still not facing me. "To the Obsidian Keep. You will be presented at court. Your beauty, your name, they are your entry. Your mission is to earn his trust, to get close to him, to learn his secrets, his weaknesses, the source of his power." I already knew. I had been trained for this, not with sword and shield, but with courtly manners, with the language of fans and lowered lashes, with the art of making a man feel like a king while you plotted his downfall. I was to be a gilded poison. "And then?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. He finally turned. His eyes, the same pale blue as my own, held no warmth, only the grim resolve of a general. "And then you will deliver his death. The circle will provide the means when the time is right." The journey to the Obsidian Keep was a descent into another world. Vane Hold was built of granite and stubbornness, but the capital, Blackstone, was a city of spikes and shadows. The keep itself was a monstrosity of polished black rock, a claw of night scraped against the pale belly of the sky. It seemed to drink the light, the tall, narrow windows like slits in a helm, and the air thrummed with a low, almost imperceptible hum of contained power. The scent here was different. Ozone after a lightning strike, cold stone, and something else. Something ancient and metallic, like old blood on an altar. My introduction to court was a blur of murmured names, assessing stares, and the relentless rustle of expensive fabrics. I wore a gown of deep winter blue, the color of a midnight sky, my pale hair braided in a crown atop my head, a weapon polished and presented. And then I saw him. Kael Morn did not command attention. He devoured it. He was not a large man, but he carried a density, a gravity that bent the room around him. He stood near the iron throne. Not a chair of swords, but a twisted, jagged thing of meteoric iron that seemed to pulse with a faint, dark light. He was dressed in unrelenting black, his doublet severe, devoid of ornament. His hair was the color of raven's wings, swept back from a brow that was too intelligent, too knowing. And his eyes, his eyes, they were the color of a winter storm, a turbulent gray that saw not the surface of people, but the fractured landscapes of their souls. He was listening to some fawning lord, his expression utterly impassive, a marble mask of power. Then, as if feeling the weight of my gaze, his eyes shifted. They found me across the crowded hall, through the smoke and the sea of glittering courtiers. Time did not stop, it curdled. The noise of the court faded to a distant hum. In that single piercing look I felt utterly flayed. He saw the noblewoman, the daughter of a rival house, but I feared, for a terrifying heartbeat, that he saw the assassin beneath the silk. He did not smile. He merely held my gaze for a moment longer than was proper, a silent acknowledgement of a new player on his board, before turning back to the lord, dismissing me as one might a mildly interesting insect. That night, in the chambers assigned to me, rooms that were luxurious but felt like a gilded cage, the air tasting of dust and isolation, I stood by the window. The moon was a sliver of bone in the sky, casting a feeble light on the snow-shrouded city below. My fingers trembled as I traced the cold glass. I could still feel the chill of his gaze. This was the monster I was to seduce. This was the heart I was to stop. Days turned into a tense, silent dance. I attended feasts, walked the frost-laced gardens, and made polite conversation, all the while feeling his presence like a storm on the horizon. He was always there, a shadow at the edge of my vision, never approaching yet never far. I learned the rhythms of the keep. I learned that he preferred the silence of the Western Library, that he walked the battlements alone each night, that he had a fondness for a rare, bitter wine from the Southern Isles. The first real encounter came a week later. A winter feast, the great hall ablaze with 1,000 candles, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat, mulled wine, and the cloying sweetness of winter bloom flowers. Music swelled, a lively, complex tune, and the floor was a whirl of color as couples danced. I was standing near a pillar, a goblet of wine untouched in my hand, observing, when a hush fell over our section of the hall. He was there, Kael Morn, moving through the crowd which parted for him like wheat before a scythe. He stopped before me. The music seemed to falter. "Lady Lyra," he said. His voice was lower than I had imagined, a soft, dark caress that slid over my skin. It was not the roar of a beast, but the whisper of a blade being drawn. The North is famed for its resilience, but not its grace. I would see if the tales are true. Grant me this dance. It was not a request. It was a test. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to flee. But the mission was everything. I placed my cold hand in his. His grip was firm, his skin surprisingly warm, calloused in places that spoke of a life not entirely spent holding a quill. He led me to the center of the floor. The music began again, a slower, more intimate melody. This was not a dance. It was a conversation without words. His hand settled on the small of my back, a brand through the layers of silk and velvet. Our other hands joined, and my fingers were swallowed by his. We began to move. He was a flawless dancer, his steps sure and commanding, his body a hair's breadth from mine. I could feel the heat radiating from him, a furnace contained within that severe black shell. I kept my eyes lowered, fixed on the stark line of his jaw. "You are watching me very intently, Lady Lyra," he murmured, his breath stirring the fine hairs near my temple. "Are you looking for a weakness?" My heart stuttered. I forced my gaze upward, meeting the storm in his eyes. "I am merely trying to keep pace, my lord. Your reputation precedes you in all things, including your skill as a dancer." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Reputations are cages built by the fears of others. Do you frighten easily, my lady?" "The North breeds resilience, as you noted," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not fear. We shall see." He spun me, the world a blur of light and sound, and then pulled me back, closer this time. My chest brushed against his for a fleeting, electrifying moment. The scent of him filled my senses, clean, sharp, like snow and smoke in that faint metallic tang of magic. I could feel the hard muscle of his shoulder beneath my hand, the solid strength of him, the forbidden touch, the heat of his breath near my ear, the rustle of my gown against his boots. It was all a symphony of sensory overload designed to disarm. And it was working. The line between my performance and a sudden shocking flicker of real attraction blurred into nothing. He was not a monster in this moment. He was a man, a devastatingly powerful and perceptive one, and the danger he represented was a headier intoxicant than any wine. When the music ended, he released me, and the sudden absence of his heat was a physical shock. He bowed, a precise, economical movement. "The tales, it seems, were incomplete," he said, his stormy eyes holding mine. "The North holds more than resilience. It holds fascination." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the center of the floor, my body humming, my carefully constructed walls already showing their first treacherous cracks. The ember had been struck, and in the frozen silence of my heart, I felt the first terrifying whisper of its heat. Part 2: The Kindling. The days after the feast were a slow, deliberate burn. The ember he had struck smoldered in the silence of my chambers, in the echo of his voice in the crowded halls. My mission, once a clear, cold purpose, now felt like a knot tightening in my stomach. Every interaction was a performance, and I was no longer sure who was the actress and who was the audience. He began to seek me out, not with overt attention, but with a predator's patience. He would appear beside me in the library, his presence announced by the shift in the air, the subtle scent of snow and magic. He asked my opinion on obscure historical texts, his questions sharp, probing the edges of my education. I answered carefully, weaving truth with the lies I had been taught, each conversation a duel with words instead of steel. One evening, I was in the Western Library, truly lost in a heavy tome of Dragon's Reach genealogy, tracing the bloodlines he had supposedly severed. The rain had begun, a soft, persistent whisper against the leaded glass windows, the sound a soothing counterpoint to the frantic beat of my own heart. The fire in the great hearth guttered, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to lick at the edges of the room. "You seek answers in the past, Lady Lyra," I started, the book nearly slipping from my lap. He stood over me, a silhouette against the firelight. I had not heard him approach. He moved with a silence that was unnerving. "The past often holds the key to the present, my lord," I managed, my voice a breathless thing. "Does it?" He moved to the chair opposite mine, sinking into it with a languid grace that belied his intensity. His storm gray eyes reflected the flames. Or does it merely provide a map of our failures? We are doomed to repeat the tragedies we are most determined to avoid. He was speaking of the kingdom, of the wars and betrayals that stained its history. But his gaze was fixed on me, and it felt as if he were speaking of something else entirely, something more intimate and damning. Perhaps we are, I said, closing the book with a soft thud. Or perhaps knowledge is the one weapon that can change our course. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips, and the transformation was devastating. It stripped away the mask of the cruel advisor and revealed the man beneath, a man of sharp intellect and a weary, cynical humor. An optimist. How refreshing. He gestured to the book. The Vanes have an interesting lineage, tied to the old magic, the kind that sleeps in the stone and the ice. A different flavor to the power I wield. My blood ran cold. Was this a test? A threat? Old stories, my lord. Superstition to frighten children on long winter nights. All magic was once superstition until it proved useful, he countered, his voice dropping to that intimate, conspiratorial tone that made my skin prickle. Tell me, Lyra, do you believe in the power of blood? In the debts it incurs, the destinies it writes. He had used my given name. The familiarity was a shock, a forbidden touch in itself. The air between us grew thick, charged with the unsaid. The only sounds were the rain on stone, the crackle of the fire, and the ragged pull of my own breath. I believe we write our own destinies, my lord, I whispered. With every choice we make. His eyes held mine, and in their depths I saw not a monster, but a profound, isolating loneliness that mirrored my own. A noble sentiment, and a dangerous one. He stood then, and the moment broke. The rain will make the outer bailey treacherous. I will have a servant escort you to your chambers. He left as silently as he had arrived, leaving me with the ghost of his presence and the unsettling feeling that I was not the only one playing a deep and dangerous game. The next encounter was more potent, more intimate. It happened in his private study, a room I had been trying to gain access to for weeks. A summons came, delivered by a stone-faced guard. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs as I followed him through the labyrinthine corridors to a heavy oak door banded with iron. I entered. The room was exactly as I had imagined it. Walls of dark wood, shelves groaning with books and strange arcane instruments. A massive desk of obsidian dominated the space, its surface unnaturally smooth. But it was the air that struck me most. It was thick, humming with a latent energy that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. The scent of ozone and old parchment was overwhelming. Kael stood by the fireplace, not looking at me but staring into the flames. He had discarded his formal doublet and wore only a black tunic and breeches, a startling informality that felt more invasive than any touch. "You are said to have an interest in the old tongues," he said without preamble, his back to me. The language of spellcraft. This was it. The reason the circle had sent me. My supposed scholarly pursuit was my key. "I have studied them, my lord." A passing fancy. A dangerous fancy. He turned. His face was in shadow, the firelight carving the sharp planes of his cheekbones and jaw. He gestured to a scroll of yellowed vellum on his desk. "This one has eluded me. The script is a derivative of High Valyrium, but the cadence is wrong. Read it to me." It was a test far more direct than the dance. This was the heart of my mission, to get close to his secrets, to his magic. I walked to the desk, my legs unsteady. The vellum was covered in spidery, faded script. I recognized it instantly. It was not a spell of great power, but a simple poetic invocation to the dawn. But in that moment it felt like my own death warrant. I began to read, my voice trembling despite my efforts to control it. The words were foreign on my tongue, the syllables awkward. I could feel his gaze on me, a physical weight. I described the words, the feel of the ancient vellum under my fingertips, the way the firelight danced over the ink. "Your pronunciation is flawed," he said softly, his voice much closer than I expected. I started looking up. He was right beside me, his body heat a palpable force. He reached out, and his hand covered mine where it rested on the scroll. My breath hitched. His touch was not gentle but possessive, his fingers warm and strong as they enveloped my own. The tremor in my hand stilled, not from calm, but from a paralyzing shock. "Here," he murmured, his head bent close to mine, his breath a warm caress against my ear. He guided my finger to trace a specific rune. The emphasis falls on the second syllable. It is not a command. It is a plea. His voice was a low thrum, vibrating through my very bones. The scent of him, of magic and man, was intoxicating. The scroll, the mission, the circle, it all blurred into a distant hum. There was only the heat of his hand on mine, the gravelly whisper of his voice so near, the dizzying proximity of his body. I was pretending to read a spell, but he was weaving one around me, an enchantment of proximity and whispered intimacy. My voice failed me. I could only stare at our joined hands, at his long, capable fingers holding mine captive. This was no longer a performance. This was a surrender I had not anticipated. The line between duty and desire did not just blur. It incinerated, leaving only a raw, aching need in its wake. He did not release my hand for a long moment. When he finally did, the absence was a fresh wound. He stepped back, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "You have a natural affinity for the old ways, Lyra," he said, his tone once more that of the detached advisor. "We shall continue your lessons. You may go." I fled his study, my body alight with a fire that had nothing to do with the hearth. In the cold silence of my own room, I pressed my hands to my flaming cheeks. His touch was seared into my skin, his voice echoed in my mind. I was supposed to be the spy, the seductress, but as I stood there, trembling in the moonlit dark, I feared with a terrifying, thrilling certainty that I was the one being seduced. The kindling had caught, and the flame, once a tool, was now threatening to consume the hand that held it. Part 3: The Conflagration. The lessons became our secret ritual. A stolen hour in the waning light of his study where the world outside ceased to exist. We would pore over scrolls of forgotten poetry, dissect treaties written in dead languages, and sometimes just sit in a silence that was more intimate than any conversation. He was a brilliant, demanding teacher, and I a starved and willing pupil. With every passing day, the portrait of the monster painted by the circle cracked and flaked away, revealing a man of immense, lonely power, a mind sharp enough to cut the world, and a soul that bore the weight of a kingdom's sins. I learned the taste of the bitter southern wine he favored, the way he would absently trace the patterns in the obsidian desk when deep in thought, the slight, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes when I offered an insight that surprised him. I was collecting secrets, just as the circle had commanded, but they were not the secrets of troop movements or magical weaknesses. They were the secrets of his laughter, a rare low sound that felt like a victory. The secret of the small white scar that bisected his left eyebrow. The secret of the way he would sometimes look at me when he thought I wasn't watching. His stormy gaze stripped of all its defenses, filled with a raw, bewildered hunger that mirrored my own. The tension between us was a living thing. A third presence in the room that thickened the air and shortened our breaths. It was in the way our fingers would brush when reaching for the same scroll, the lingering heat of the contact jolting up my arm. It was in the way he would stand behind me to look over my shoulder at a text, his chest not touching my back, but the heat of him a brand through my gown, his breath stirring the hair at my nape. We were a hair's breadth from combustion, dancing on the edge of a precipice, and the falling felt more like flying than any terror. The breaking point came on a night of a howling gale. The wind screamed around the obsidian keep like a banshee, rattling the window panes and snuffing out the torches in the courtyards. A summons came from him, not to his study, but to his private chambers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild thing. This was different. This was not the sanctioned intellectual intimacy of the study. This was the inner sanctum, the lion's den. The circle's warnings echoed in my mind, a distant, fading chorus. Cruelty, power, death. But all I could see was the weary intelligence in his eyes. All I could feel was the ghost of his hand on mine. I went to him. His chambers were Spartan, a reflection of the man himself. A large bed draped in dark furs, a single, heavy armchair by a fireplace large enough to stand in, and shelves of books. The only opulence was the view. A massive arched window that looked out over the storm-lashed mountains, the moon a blurred coin behind racing clouds. He stood before that window, a silhouette of contained power against the chaos outside. He turned as I entered. He was in a state of undress similar to the night in his study, just the black tunic and breeches, his feet bare on the stone floor. The informality was a weapon that shattered my last defenses. "The storm mirrors the unrest in the southern provinces," he said, his voice a low rumble that competed with the wind. "They whisper my name as a curse there. Do you care what they whisper?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He considered this, his gaze intense. "I care about the stability of this kingdom. The whispers are the first sign of a foundation cracking." He took a step toward me. "You are shivering." I hadn't realized I was. The cold of the stone floor was seeping through my thin slippers, but it was the tension, the sheer, terrifying anticipation, that made me tremble. "Come," he commanded, his voice soft yet leaving no room for refusal. "Stand by the fire." I moved to the hearth, holding my hands out to the blazing logs. The heat was a welcome shock. He came to stand beside me, so close I could feel the warmth of his arm next to mine. The silence stretched, filled only by the roar of the fire and the lament of the wind. "You have been my one point of calm, Lyra," he said, his gaze fixed on the flames. "In a sea of sycophants and plotters you are real. A puzzle I cannot quite solve. Perhaps some puzzles are not meant to be solved, my lord," I whispered, daring to look at his profile, the firelight gilding the sharp line of his nose, his jaw. "Only appreciated." His head turned slowly, and his stormy eyes captured mine. The world outside, the storm, the kingdom, my mission, it all dissolved into insignificance. There was only the heat of the fire on my skin, the scent of him, the raw, unguarded hunger in his gaze. "I am not a good man," he said, the words a stark confession in the flickering light. "The things I have done to keep this kingdom from tearing itself apart, they have stained me. There is blood on these hands that will never wash away." He looked down at his own hands, and in that moment, he looked not like the feared royal advisor, but like a man drowning in the consequences of his own choices. "We are all stained by something, Kael," I said, and the use of his name was a leap into the abyss. His eyes flashed, a spark of lightning in the storm. He reached out, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. His fingers did not grab or demand. They brushed against the side of my neck, just below my ear. A touch so feather-light it was almost an illusion, but the effect was cataclysmic. A jolt of pure, undiluted sensation shot through me, pooling low in my belly, turning my bones to liquid. My breath caught a sharp, audible gasp. His thumb stroked the frantic pulse at my throat. "And what stains you, Lyra of the North?" he whispered, his voice ragged. "What secret do you carry that makes your eyes so old for one so young?" His touch was my undoing. The carefully constructed walls around my heart, built of duty and lies, crumbled to dust. The tremor in my hands was no longer from fear or the cold, but from a need so profound it was a physical ache. My eyes fluttered closed for a moment, surrendering to the sensation. When I opened them, my own hand was moving of its own volition, rising to cover his where it rested against my neck. My fingers were icy against his warmth. It was an answer. Confession. A betrayal of everything I was sent to do. That single, forbidden touch in the silence of the northern night was the spark that lit the conflagration. It was the moment the spy vanished, and the woman remained. It was the point of no return. And as I stood there, my hand on his, my soul laid bare in my eyes, I knew with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty that I was already lost. The fire we had been playing with had finally caught, and I was more than willing to let it consume me. Part 4. A tangle of thorns and silk. The world after that touch was remade. The gray stones of the keep held a new secret luminescence. The cold northern air tasted of possibility. We did not speak of what had passed between us by the fire. The words were too clumsy, too finite for something so infinite. Instead, we lived in the language of glances held a moment too long, of breaths that caught when we passed in a corridor, of a universe of meaning contained in the simple act of him pulling out my chair at a state dinner. Our lessons continued, but the pretense of scholarship was a threadbare veil. We would sit for hours, a scroll open and forgotten between us, talking of everything and nothing. He spoke of his youth, of being a quick-witted, magically gifted boy plucked from obscurity and thrust into the viper's pit of the royal court. He spoke of the compromises, the hard choices, the soul he had bartered piece by piece for a stability that always felt one misstep from collapse. He never asked for my mission, for my secrets. He seemed to understand that some truths, once spoken, would shatter the fragile, beautiful thing we were building. And it was beautiful. It was the most dangerous, exquisite poison I had ever tasted. One afternoon, he led me to a place I did not know existed within the cold heart of the keep. A secluded courtyard, walled on 3 sides and open on the 4th to a breathtaking, dizzying view of the Dragon's Teeth Mountains. It was a forgotten space, a secret garden sleeping under a blanket of snow. A single ancient ironwood tree stood in the center, its bare branches etched like black lace against the pale sky. "This was the Queen's solace," he said, his voice quiet. "A place for her to remember the world beyond politics and power." He looked at me, his gaze intense. "No one comes here anymore." It was a gift, a sharing of a secret, sacred space. The silence here was different from the oppressive silence of the halls. It was a living, breathing quiet, punctuated only by the crunch of our boots in the snow and the distant cry of an eagle. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Dance with me." There was no music. There was only the wind humming a low note through the mountain passes and the rhythm of our own hearts. I moved into his arms without hesitation. This was not the formal public dance of the winter feast. This was something else entirely. His hand settled on my waist, pulling me close until our bodies were aligned, separated only by the layers of our winter clothes. My hands rested on his shoulders, feeling the solid, dependable strength of him. We began to move, a slow, swaying turn in the center of that frozen garden. Our steps were clumsy in the snow, but it didn't matter. It was the most perfect dance of my life. My cheek rested against the rough wool of his cloak, and I could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart against my own. His breath was warm in my hair. The world narrowed to this. The scent of cold in him, the feel of his hands holding me as if I were something precious, the sheer terrifying rightness of being in his arms. This was the intimacy I had been commanded to fake. But there was no artifice left in me. This was real. This was mine. And with that realization came a pain so sharp it stole my breath. The pain of knowing that all of this, was built on a lie that would eventually demand a bloody price. He felt the shift in me, the tension that seeped into my frame. He slowed our movement until we were just standing, swaying slightly, locked in an embrace in the heart of the silent, snow-blanketed world. "What is it?" he murmured into my hair. I could not tell him the truth, so I told him a different one. "I am afraid," I whispered, the words torn from a place deep within me. "Of this. Of how much I couldn't finish." The confession was too dangerous. His arms tightened around me. "I know," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I dared not name. "The things that matter most are always the most terrifying to hold." He pulled back just enough to look down at me, his stormy eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. "But I am not afraid of your fear, Lyra. I am only afraid of a world without you in it." He lowered his head, and his lips met mine. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a confession, a surrender. It was the answer to every unspoken question that had hung in the air between us since the moment our eyes first met. His mouth was warm and demanding, and I met his demand with my own desperate need. My hands slid from his shoulders to tangle in the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. The world, the snow, the keep, the circle. It all burned away in the heat of that kiss. There was only the taste of him, the feel of his body against mine, the low sound of pleasure he made in the back of his throat that vibrated through my very soul. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting together, the ghost of our mingled breath a cloud in the frigid air. The line was not just crossed, it was obliterated. I was no longer Lyra the spy, or Lyra the noblewoman. I was simply Lyra, the woman who loved Kael Morn. And the knowledge was both the most beautiful and the most devastating thing I had ever known. That night, in my chambers, I stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. My lips were still swollen from his kisses, my body still humming with the memory of his touch. The mission was a distant, ugly dream. But then my eyes fell upon the small, hidden compartment in my jewelry box. Inside it lay the means of his death, a vial of clear, odorless liquid, provided by the circle. A single drop in his wine was all it would take. I touched my fingers to my lips, the ghost of his kiss a brand. I was tangled in a web of my own making, a cruel tapestry woven with threads of thorns and the most exquisite silk, I loved the man I was sworn to kill. And in the quiet of the night, I began to pray to any god that would listen for a miracle, for a path that did not lead to his blood on my hands. Part 5. The Serpent in the Garden. The miracle never came. Instead, a raven arrived from the north, its feathers ink-black against the relentless white of the sky. The message was hidden in the seal of a seemingly innocuous letter from my father, revealed only by the heat of a candle flame. The words were a cold splash of reality, shattering the beautiful dream I had been living. The circle's patience is at an end. Morn's influence solidifies. The southern lords are poised to revolt, and he will crush them, spilling a sea of blood. His death is no longer a strategic objective. It is a moral imperative. You have his trust. Execute the command. The Frostfall Festival is your opportunity. Do not fail. The fate of dragon's reach rests upon your blade unseen. The parchment crumpled in my trembling hand. The Frostfall Festival. A week from now. A celebration of the first deepest freeze, where the wine would flow like water and the keep would be a whirl of masked revelry. It was the perfect cover for an assassination, the perfect time for a betrayal. The days that followed were a special kind of torture. Every look from Kael, every brush of his hand, every low, intimate word felt like a shard of glass twisting in my heart. I was a ghost at my own feast, smiling and laughing, my voice a hollow echo, my eyes constantly straying to the hidden vial that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy from its hiding place. He sensed the change in me. How could he not? The connection between us, once a vibrant, thrumming chord, was now frayed and taut with my deceit. "You are distant," he said to me one evening in his study. We were not reading. We were sitting in our customary chairs, the fire between us a barrier instead of a comfort. "I am tired, my lord," I lied, my gaze fixed on the flames. "The preparations for the festival are taxing. Look at me, Lyra." The command was soft but irresistible. I lifted my eyes to his. He was studying me with that unnerving perception, his stormy gaze seeing too much. "There is a shadow in you," he murmured. "A fear that was not there before. Is it the festival? The crowds?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Is it me?" The pain of his question was a physical blow. He, who saw the plots and machinations of 100 courtiers, could not see the serpent he had welcomed into his own garden. Or perhaps he could, and the love I saw in his eyes was strong enough to make him deny it. "It is nothing," I whispered, the lie ash in my mouth, "just a passing melancholy." He held my gaze for a long moment, a silent battle raging between his perception and his hope. Finally he stood and came to me. He did not touch me. He simply knelt before my chair, bringing his eyes level with mine. The sight of Kael Morn, the most powerful man in the kingdom, on his knees before me, was enough to shatter my soul. "I have lived my life in a fortress of my own making," he said, his voice raw. "The walls were necessary. They were all I knew. Then you arrived. You with your northern resilience and your old soul eyes. You did not break down the walls, Lyra. You walked through them as if they were not even there. You have become the one thing I cannot defend myself against." A single traitorous tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. He reached up and caught it with his thumb, his touch infinitely gentle. "Whatever this shadow is," he whispered, his thumb stroking my cheek, "we will face it together. You are not alone." His words were a balm and a brand. He was offering me everything, his trust, his vulnerability, his love. and I was holding the instrument of his destruction in my heart. That night I did not sleep. I paced my chambers, the two halves of my soul tearing each other apart. The noblewoman, the daughter of the circle, screamed of duty, of the thousands of lives that would be saved, of the monster he was purported to be. The woman, the one who loved him, wept and pleaded, listing his kindness, his loneliness, the goodness I had seen beneath the harsh exterior. The night of the Frostfall festival arrived. The great hall was transformed. Ice sculptures glittered like captured constellations, their facets reflecting the glow of 1,000 candles. Everyone was masked, a sea of glittering feathers, polished silver and painted leather. The air was thick with the scent of mulled wine, pine, and the cloying sweetness of ice confections. It was a scene of breathtaking beauty, a painted backdrop for a tragedy. I wore a gown of deep crimson, the color of heart's blood. My mask was a delicate thing of silver wire and raven's feathers, obscuring the upper half of my face, but doing nothing to hide the tremble of my lips. The vial was a cold, heavy weight, sewn into the hidden pocket of my sleeve. I saw him across the room. He was not masked. He never was. He stood as the unmoving center of the whirling chaos, dressed in his customary black, his gaze scanning the crowd until it found me. Even across the distance, the connection was a physical jolt. He began to move toward me, the sea of revelers parting for him. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic dying bird. This was it. The moment. I had rehearsed it 100 times in my mind. A smile, a flirtatious offer of a goblet of wine, a sleight of hand. So simple. So final. He stopped before me. The music, the laughter, the clatter of goblets. It all faded into a dull roar. "You look like a queen of fire and night," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, meant for my ears only. I could not speak. My throat was sealed shut by guilt and terror. He offered his hand. "Dance with me." It was not a command this time. It was a question, a plea. I placed my icy hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure. He led me to the center of the floor, and as his hand settled on the small of my back, I felt the hard outline of the vial press against my wrist. A reminder, a condemnation. We began to move. It was a slow, stately dance, but for us it was a funeral march. Our eyes were locked. I could see the love in his, stark and unguarded. I could see the trust. And I could see with a sudden, chilling clarity a deep, bottomless sorrow. He pulled me closer, his lips near my ear. His breath was a warm caress as he whispered words that froze the blood in my veins. "I know, Lyra." The world stopped. The music died. The crowd vanished. There was only his voice, quiet and devastatingly calm in my ear. "I have known for weeks." My steps faltered. He held me upright, his grip firm, his body a solid support against the sudden violent vertigo. He knew. Gods, he knew. "The circle of flame sends a beautiful weapon," he continued, his voice a low, intimate thrum that belied the shattering of my world. "They taught you well. You played your part to perfection. But love is a script even the most clever spymaster cannot write. I saw it in your eyes the moment it became real for you. The same moment it became a torture." Tears streamed down my cheeks now, hot and shameful, soaking into the silk of my mask. "Kael." "Hush," he whispered, his hand moving from my back to cradle my head, holding me close as we swayed, a mockery of a lover's embrace. "You do not have to say it. The why is written in the history books. The who is in every fearful whisper in this court. I am the monster they needed slain. You are not, I sobbed, the words ripped from me. You are not a monster. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his stormy eyes glistening in the candlelight. Aren't I? The things I have done, the blood on my hands, perhaps they are right. His thumb stroked my cheek, wiping away a tear. But it does not matter. None of it matters now. The dance was ending. The final notes hung in the air. He leaned in, his lips brushing my forehead in a kiss that was both a blessing and a farewell. The order is for tonight, is it not? He murmured. I could only nod, a broken, helpless gesture. He smiled then, a sad, beautiful smile that held the weight of 1,000 regrets. Then you must do your duty, my love. He released me, and the sudden space between us was an abyss. He turned and walked away, not toward the throne, not toward his allies, but toward the shadowed archway that led to his private chambers. He was giving me a path. He was walking to his death, and he was leaving the knife in my hand. I stood frozen, a statue of grief and shame in the center of the joyous spinning crowd. The vial in my sleeve was no longer a tool. It was a curse. He knew. He had always known. And he loved me still. The betrayal was not mine alone anymore. It was a shared tragic burden. He had discovered my secret, and in doing so, had handed me his heart, trusting me to be both his executioner and his elegy. Part 6. The Ashes and the Ember. I do not remember leaving the great hall. The vibrant colors, the raucous music, the masked faces, they blurred into a nauseating watercolor of a life I was no longer part of. My feet, moving with a will of their own, carried me not to the safety of my chambers, but through the silent, torchlit corridors toward his. Toward the lion's den, now a lamb's chosen slaughterhouse. The heavy oak door to his chamber was slightly ajar. An invitation. A final test. Pushed it open. The room was lit only by the dying fire, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to reach for me. He stood by the great arched window, his back to me, a silhouette against the moonlit tapestry of the snow-capped dragon's teeth. A single goblet of that bitter southern wine sat on the table beside him untouched. He did not turn. I wondered if you would come. His voice was calm, a deep, still pool in the heart of a hurricane. I closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing like a thunderclap in the silence. The world had narrowed to this room, to the space between our bodies, to the weight of the vial in my sleeve. You knew, I whispered, the words raw, torn from the deepest, most wounded part of me. All this time you knew. He turned slowly. The firelight caught the planes of his face, etching the weariness, the acceptance, the profound sorrow. I knew the circle would send someone. I have known of their plots for years. I did not know it would be you. And when it was, when I looked into your eyes that first night and saw not a killer's cold resolve, but a soul as lost as my own, I chose to play the fool. I chose to walk into your trap, Lyra, because the bait was a glimpse of heaven. A sob broke from my throat. I wrapped my arms around myself, trembling violently. Why? Why would you do that? Because a lifetime of power is a poor exchange for a single moment of being truly seen, he said, his gaze holding mine, stormy and unwavering. You saw the man, not the crown, not the cruelty, not the myth. You saw me, and I would trade every throne in this world for that. He took a step toward me, then another, until he was close enough to touch. The scent of him, snow and smoke and magic. wrapped around me a familiar, heartbreaking comfort. "Do it," he whispered, his voice soft as velvet, deadly as a honed blade. "Fulfill your duty. End the story the way it was written." My hand went to my sleeve, my fingers closing around the cold glass of the vial. The poison. The means of his death. My fingers trembled so violently I could barely grasp it. I pulled it out, the clear liquid catching the faint firelight. A tiny contained death. "I can't," I choked out, the tears flowing freely now. "I cannot. You must." His hand came up, but he did not take the vial. Instead, his fingers wrapped around my hand that held it, his warmth seeping into my icy skin. He was holding the hand that held his death, the ultimate act of trust, the final, devastating intimacy. If you do not, the circle will send another. Someone less compassionate. Someone who will not grant me the mercy of a clean death. They will start a war that will tear this kingdom apart, and they will paint you as a traitor for your failure. Your life will be forfeit. "I don't care," I cried, my vision blurring. "I do," he said, his voice fierce, his grip on my hand tightening. "I care, Lyra. Your life is the one thing I have left worth protecting. Your freedom is the only crown I have left to give." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against mine, our joined hands holding the poison pressed between our hearts. I could feel the frantic, terrified beat of my own, and the slow, steady, resigned rhythm of his. "This is the final night," he murmured, his breath mingling with mine. "Let love and danger share one last breath. Let my end be my final gift to you. A world without me in it is a price I will pay for a world where you get to live." In that moment, the last of my resolve shattered. The spy was gone. The noblewoman was gone. There was only a woman, heartbroken and utterly, devastatingly in love with a man she was being forced to destroy. My free hand came up to cup his jaw, my thumb stroking the line of his cheekbone, memorizing the feel of him. I rose onto my toes and pressed my lips to his. It was a kiss of goodbye, of apology, of a love that had bloomed in the most forbidden of gardens and was now being cut down at the root. It was salt and sorrow and a beauty so acute it was agony. He kissed me back with a desperate, aching tenderness, a silent communication of everything we would never have, everything we were sacrificing. When we broke apart, I knew what I had to do. Not for the circle, not for Dragon's Reach, but for him. To honor his choice, to accept his gift. With a final shuddering breath, I pulled my hand from his. I uncorked the vial. The air filled with a faint, sweet, almond-like scent, the scent of Oblivion's kiss, the circle's favored tool. I did not look away from his eyes as I walked to the table and poured the entire contents into the single goblet of wine. The clear liquid vanished into the deep red. I turned back to him, the empty vial falling from my numb fingers to shatter on the stone floor. The sound was like a tiny star breaking. He looked from the goblet to me, his expression one of profound peace. "Thank you." He walked to the table, picked up the goblet. He raised it in a silent toast to me, his stormy eyes holding all the love, all the pain, all the unspoken words of a lifetime. Then he drank. He did not gasp or choke. He simply stood there watching me as the poison did its work. A slight tremor went through him. His knuckles whitened on the goblet. Then he let it fall. It hit the rug with a dull thud, the wine spreading like a bloodstain. He staggered. I was there in an instant, catching him, lowering him to the floor before the fire. I cradled his head in my lap, my tears falling onto his face. His skin was already growing cool. "Look at me," I begged, my voice breaking. "Kael, look at me." His eyes, those beautiful storm gray eyes, found mine. The love in them was undimmed. A final soft breath escaped his lips. "Live," he whispered, "for me." And then the storm in his eyes stilled. I do not know how long I sat there, holding him, rocking him, my world reduced to ashes. The fire crackled, the moon traced its path across the sky, and the man I loved grew cold in my arms. Dawn was a gray smear at the window when the numbness was pierced by a sharp, survivalist instinct. His final gift. My freedom. I laid his head gently on the floor, my fingers brushing a last, lingering caress across his brow. I stood, my body aching, my soul hollowed out. I took nothing but the memory of his touch. I walked out of his chambers, down the silent halls, and out into the bailey. The guards, perhaps on his prior orders, did not stop me. I saddled my own horse, my movements mechanical, my mind a void. As I rode out through the main gate, the first light of the sun struck the highest peaks of the dragon's teeth, setting them ablaze. I did not look back. I rode north into the snow, into the emptiness. His final words were a whisper on the wind, a scar and a flame etched into the very fabric of my being. Live. For me. Epilogue. The snows have come and gone a dozen times since I left the Obsidian Keep. I live in a small, isolated croft in the highest reaches of the northern marches, where the wind sings the same dirge it always has. The circle calls me a traitor. My family name is disgraced. I am a ghost in my own land, but I am alive. And sometimes, on nights when the wind is still and the moon is a sliver of bone, I stand by my window and remember. I remember the heat of his hand on mine, the sound of his voice in the silence, the way his eyes held the light of 1,000 storms. I remember the taste of his kiss, a forbidden poetry written on my lips. The love we shared was a secret, a crime, a tragedy. It was built on lies and paid for in blood, but it was real. It survives in my memory, not as an open wound, but as a scar, a permanent, beautiful reminder of what was lost, and what was, for a fleeting, glorious moment, found. It is a quiet, enduring flame in the perpetual winter of my heart, and I tend to it, I honor it, for it is all I have left of him. And in the deep, listening silence of the north, I keep my promise. I live. And so the final ember of Lyra and Kael's story fades into memory. We hope this tale of forbidden love, sacrifice, and a love that burned brighter than any crown found a home in your heart. If you wish to wander through other worlds of dark fantasy, fierce passion, and epic romance, your sanctuary awaits. Follow the path to Velvet Valor Romantasy Audiobook. Subscribe to become part of our inner circle, and you'll never miss a journey into the shadows and the light. Let us know which moment shattered and remade you in the comments below. Was it the final dance? The whispered confession in the snow? Your thoughts are the magic that brings these stories to life. And if this story left you breathless, let us know with a like. It is a silent signal, a flare in the night that tells us you crave more tales of love, danger, and the choices that define us. Until the next forbidden tale unfolds, thank you for listening.